Nobody in Harwick County thought the old Pelletier orchard was coming back. Not the agricultural extension officer who had inspected it twice. Not the 3 farmers who had walked through it and left. Not the bank that had foreclosed on it. And certainly not the woman at the county records office who laughed out loud when she processed the sale of 12 acres of dead apple trees to a 16-year-old boy named Eli Voss for $800. $800. That was every dollar Eli had earned over 2 summers mowing lawns, mucking stalls, and doing odd jobs across 3 neighboring farms. He had saved it to buy a truck. Instead, he bought a dead orchard. His mother asked him what he was thinking. His agriculture teacher at Harwick High said it was a valuable lesson in understanding sunk costs. His best friend said, and this is a direct quote, "Eli, they are sticks." But Eli Voss had noticed something nobody else had bothered to look for. And what happened over the next 18 months, in that 12-acre graveyard of dead apple trees, would be talked about in Harwick County for years. This is the Rural File. And this is Eli's story. Eli Voss grew up on his family's 40-acre mixed farm in Harwick County, the kind of operation that produces enough to live on and not much more. His father ran beef cattle. His mother kept a large vegetable garden and sold preserves at the county market. Eli had been doing farm chores since he could carry a bucket. By the time he was 12, he was helping with calving. By 14, he was managing the vegetable irrigation on his own. He was not a remarkable student in the classroom. He was, by any measure, a remarkable observer outside it. His agriculture teacher at Harwick High, a woman named Mrs. Darrow who had been teaching for 23 years and had seen every kind of farm kid come through her classroom, would later say that Eli had the most developed eye for plant distress of any student she had ever taught. He could look at a field and tell you what it was missing, she said. Not always what it needed, but what it was missing. That's a different skill. The Pelletier orchard had been a working apple operation for 31 years before Gerald Pelletier's health declined and the farm fell behind on its debts. The trees had not been pruned in 4 years. They had not been sprayed for disease in 3. The irrigation system had partially failed 2 seasons back. The grass between the rows had grown and died back 3 times without management. The county extension office had assessed the orchard twice at the bank's request. Both assessments reached the same conclusion. The trees were too far gone. Restoration would cost more than the orchard could ever return in fruit. The bank had listed the 12 acres for $6,000. No offers came. They dropped it to $3,000, then $1,500, then $800, just to clear the liability off the books. Eli had driven past the orchard on his bicycle 3 times a week for 2 years while making his lawn mowing rounds. He had been looking at those trees the whole time. What he had noticed, standing at the fence one afternoon in late autumn when the trees were at their most skeletal and honestly their most honest, was not what was dead. It was what was still alive, not the outer bark, not the branch tips, which were indeed dead and brittle, but at the base of the main limbs, at the branch collars where the primary scaffold branches met the trunk, he could see the faint swelling of what an experienced orchardist would recognize as dormant buds. Not dead wood, sleeping wood. Dead trees don't have that, Eli would say later. I'd been around enough trees to know the difference between a tree that's gone and a tree that's waiting. These were waiting. They just didn't have anyone paying attention. He withdrew his lawn mowing savings. He bought the orchard. The first day Eli walked his orchard as its owner, he counted the trees, 340. He was 16 years old, alone, with no equipment, no irrigation budget, no restoration plan in writing, and $800 already spent. He went home and got on his school laptop. He spent the next 3 weeks reading everything he could find on apple tree restoration, University Extension Service documents, old orcharding manuals his father found in a box in the barn, YouTube tutorials by orchardists in Vermont and Washington State, and one exceptionally detailed series of videos by a retired pomologist in New Zealand who had spent his career bringing neglected heritage orchards back from the edge. What Eli learned was that neglected apple trees are not a lost cause. They are a restoration project. The process, called renovation pruning, involves removing the dead wood systematically over 2 to 3 seasons, opening the canopy to light, reducing the tree's energy demand to what the root system can actually support, and allowing the remaining living wood to redirect its resources toward new growth, rather than maintaining dead branches. It was not complicated. It was time-consuming, physical, and required patience that most adults with mortgages and operating costs could not afford. A 16-year-old with summers free was, structurally, the perfect person for this particular job. He started on a Saturday in January. He worked alone for the first 6 weekends. His method was precise and slow. He had printed a diagram of the ideal apple tree scaffold structure and taped it to the inside of his jacket so he could reference it. Each tree took him between 90 minutes and 3 hours to assess and prune, depending on how much dead wood it carried. He was aiming to finish all 340 trees before bud break in early April. He had approximately 14 weekends to do it. His agriculture teacher, Mrs. Darrow, heard what he was doing through the small-town network of people who notice what teenagers are up to. She drove out to the orchard on a February Saturday and found Eli halfway up a tree with a pruning saw. She stood at the row end and watched him work for 20 minutes without saying anything. Then she said, "Your cuts are clean. That's the most important thing at this stage," he said. "I've been practicing on the dead ones first." She came back the following Saturday, and the one after that. She never asked permission. She brought her own loppers. Word spread the way it does in small counties. By March, on a given Saturday morning, there might be 4 people working the orchard. Eli's father for 2 hours before his own farm needed him, a retired farmer named Harold, who had known the Pelletier family and wanted to see the place come back, Mrs. Darrow, and Eli. Nobody was paid. Nobody was asked to come. They just showed up. The laughter, if anyone was still laughing, was quieter by March. By the first week of April, Eli had pruned 281 trees. 59 remained. He was going to finish before bud break, just barely, and only because Mrs. Darrow and Harold and his father had shown up when they did. And then on a Tuesday morning in the second week of April, a school day, which meant Eli did not see it happen but learned about it from Harold, who had come out to check on the irrigation line he had been helping repair. Harold called Eli's mother. He said, "You need to tell that boy to come and look at his trees." After school that afternoon, Eli rode his bicycle to the orchard. He walked into the first row. He stopped at the 3rd tree. He looked at the branches, the same branches he had pruned to their clean scaffold structure over the past 14 weeks, and he saw what Harold had seen: buds. On 43 of the 281 pruned trees, bud break. Not on all of them, not yet, but on 43 trees, the dormant life that had been waiting under the dead bark had found enough resource, enough light, enough redirected energy from the cleaning of the canopy to finally break surface. He called Mrs. Darrow. He said, "They're waking up." She said, "I know. Harold called me too." He said, 43 so far." She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Eli, by the end of May, I think you're going to have a much bigger number than that." She was right. By the end of May, 206 of the 340 trees were in full blossom. 206 trees that every adult professional who had assessed this orchard had declared dead. The county extension officer drove out in June. He walked the rows for 45 minutes. He came back to where Eli was working on the remaining trees and said, to a 16-year-old boy who had spent his lawn mowing savings and 14 winter weekends on something everyone said was finished, "Son, I owe you an apology. And I'd like to understand what you saw that I didn't." Eli showed him the branch collar buds. The officer looked at them for a long time. Then he said, "I've been doing this job for 19 years and I stopped looking for those." The blossoms set fruit. Not on every tree, and not in the volume a fully mature managed orchard would produce in a normal season. First-year fruit after restoration is always modest. The trees have spent the season relearning how to grow rather than how to produce. But 112 of the 206 blossoming trees set fruit that first season. In September of that year, Eli Voss harvested his first crop. He sold them at the Harwick County Farmers Market to 2 local restaurants that had been looking for a local apple supplier and to a small cidery 20 miles north that had been sourcing its fruit from 3 states away and paid a premium for local heritage varieties. The cidery owner came to the orchard in August, while the apples were still on the trees, to assess the fruit. He walked the rows with Eli. He stopped at one tree and pointed to a particular apple variety. a pale yellow-green heritage variety that Eli had not been able to identify but had noticed produced larger-than-average fruit with an unusually aromatic skin. The cidery owner said, "Do you know what that is?" Eli said he didn't. The cidery owner said, "That's a Calville Blanc. It's a French heritage variety from the 16th century. It's almost impossible to find commercially anymore. I've been trying to source it for 3 years." He bought the entire yield of that tree on the spot. The following spring, the restoration continued. Eli, now 17, enrolled in the County Community College Agricultural Science program while finishing high school, taking the orcharding course specifically. His instructor assigned the class the Pelletier orchard case as a study in ecological restoration without professional oversight. The case was Eli's own orchard. He sat in the back of the class and said nothing until the instructor asked if anyone had questions. Then he raised his hand and described the branch collar bud identification technique from the inside. The instructor stopped the class. He said, "Where did you learn that?" Eli said, "In the orchard." By the end of Eli's second season, 294 of the 340 trees were producing. The 46 that had not recovered were removed, their stumps left in place for the root systems to support the soil, and Eli used the cleared spaces to plant 15 new heritage variety grafts he had propagated himself from cuttings taken from the strongest of the existing trees. He was 18 years old. He owned a working orchard. He had turned $800, 2 winters of weekends, and the stubbornness to look at a dead thing and ask whether it was really dead, into a viable agricultural enterprise, generating enough income to pay his community college fees with something left over. What Eli Voss did was not magic. It was not luck. It was not even particularly complicated. It was looking. Specifically, it was looking at something that everyone else had looked at and left, and asking a different question than they had asked. The professionals who assessed the Pelletier orchard asked, "Can this orchard produce fruit cost-effectively?" The answer to that question, given the investment required and the timeline to production, was no. Eli did not ask that question. He asked, "Are these trees alive?" And the answer to that question, for most of them, was yes. The right question found the right answer. Everything else followed. Here is what Eli's story leaves behind for anyone paying attention. The first thing, the difference between dead and dormant is everything. Before you write off the land, the project, the relationship, the idea, check for the branch collar buds. They are small. They are easy to miss. But they are the difference between something that is over and something that is waiting. The second thing, 16-year-olds are occasionally right about things that 19-year professionals get wrong, not because they know more, but because they have not yet learned what to stop looking for. That is not always a weakness. The third thing, the people who showed up on those winter Saturdays, Mrs. Darrow with her loppers, Harold who wanted to see the place come back, Eli's father who came for 2 hours before his own farm needed him. None of them were paid, and none of them were asked. They came because something worth saving was being saved, and that turned out to be enough reason. And the fourth thing, $800 and a willingness to look where other people had stopped looking, can, under the right conditions, buy you an orchard. The woman at the county records office who laughed when she processed the sale sent Eli a note the following spring. She had heard about the blossoms from someone who had driven past and stopped their car to look. The note said, "I owe you one. I'll know better next time." Eli kept the note. He pinned it to the inside of the equipment shed where he keeps his pruning tools, not as a trophy, as a reminder that the most important question is usually the one nobody has thought to ask yet. The Pelletier orchard, Eli Voss's orchard now, produces fruit every autumn. The Calville Blanc tree produces every year, and every spring without fail the blossoms come back. This is the rural file. These are the stories that happen in the quiet seasons, in the dead orchards, in the winter weekends when nobody is watching. If this one stayed with you, subscribe. If Eli's story taught you something today about looking where others stopped looking, about the difference between dead and dormant, about what $800 and a willingness to pay attention can build, share it with one person who needs to hear it. And drop your age in the comments. Let's see how many people Eli's story reached across every generation.